Whoa, whoa, whoa! This is Mr. Tran with another AP tip of the week. This week we are going to focus on topics and skill sets most likely needed on this year's AP exam. Before we start, I want to talk about the format of this year's exam. What was said by the Vice President of College Board, Trevor Packer, is that even though it is only 2 FRQs, the questions are designed for students to potentially not finish. So the key point on exam day is to make sure you are keeping track of your own time. When it gets close to that 5 minutes to submit, please stop working on the exam and start to submit your answer. If you don't submit your answer on time, you essentially get no points from that first question. If you don't finish the question, it is okay. We don't know what the grading will look like, so as long as you finish, the majority of the exam or the question, you should be fine in the range of 3, 4, and 5. Again, we don't know how it's graded. But enough with this exam talk. We will be coming out with a video on how this exam will work later this week when College Board releases the testing application, how you guys will be testing. I'll get more information on that on Tuesday night. I'll create something that night and I'll send it to y'all Wednesday midday after my Zoom meetings. So first up, we have the food web. You need to be able to read one. You need to be able to identify the producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and potentially tertiary consumers. The arrows point from an organism that is eaten to the organism that eats it. For example, we have the algae is being eaten by the sea urchin because the arrow goes from algae pointing to the sea urchin. Energy transfer between the trophic levels, the different species here, is inefficient with a typical efficiency around 10%. So let's break down what is given here. At the bottom, we have the producers. So I'm going to be circling. This is the very bottom of the food web. This is the producer. And again, it's either the seaweed or the algae. And depending on the route we take, it will determine what type of consumer the species turns out to be. Like for example, if we take a look at the common seal, and I'm going to be illustrating it through 2 different paths. So the first path will be blue. So we start with the seaweed. The fish is the primary consumer, and it leads to the common seal being the secondary consumer. Whereas if we started with the algae, I'm going to do this in purple. The algae is consumed by the limpet, and the limpet would be, I'm going to label it on the side here, the primary consumer. Then the limpet is eaten by the lobster, which turns out to be the secondary consumer. And finally, the lobster is eaten by the common seal, and here, common seal is the tertiary consumer. So as you can see, same species, different type of consumer based on the path that was taken. Moving on to the next concept, we have species richness versus species evenness, and this describes biodiversity. So let's start off by defining the terms. Species richness, and I'm going to define it here, is the number of different species in a community or ecosystem. And then we have species evenness being how close in number the different species are to one another. Or basically how even these different species are in number. So the first thing we have to do is to take a look at the table. You will need to be able to read a diagram like the one shown to you on the previous slide or a table given here. So when I look at a table, I always start off with the borders to see what it is trying to tell me. I see that I have ecosystems and the different ecosystems here. And at the very top, I have the 4 different producer species. Next, I take a look at the values and interpret what the values are trying to tell me. So if I take a look, I can apply the concept of species richness and evenness based on the numbers given and what the table is trying to tell me. So ecosystem B seems to be lacking shrubs and trees, with them being 0. So ecosystem B is the one that is the least diverse. This is because it is not species rich at all. It only has 2 different types of species compared to the rest of the other ecosystems. And if we are taking a look at which one is the most diverse, we'll have to look at ecosystem A, because the numbers are very, very close to each other. They're not exactly even, but they are close to each other, relatively close. And the next one would be ecosystem D. Again, the numbers are close, but the reason why ecosystem A would be considered the most diverse is because of this number right here. The 3 is very, 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 very far from the 9 compared to the 5. So it's a very big difference. And there's a clear winner, ecosystem A, in being the most diverse. Demographic transition is all about describing a population, usually of a country, in terms of birth and death rates. We're going to cover the 4 different stages. Stage number 1, death rates and birth rates are high and relatively in balance. Stage 1 is usually referred to as the pre-industrial stage. So pre-industrial. This is marked by growth rate that's very, very slow. And I'm going to do that in green. So it's located lower on the y-axis. And this is influenced in part on the availability of food. Stage 2 is often referred to as the developing country phase. So again, developing country phase. So death rates drop, and we see that it drops very, very drastically. And when this death rate drops, it's due to the rapid improvement in food supply and sanitation. This increases lifespan and also reduces diseases. This stage experiences a large increase in population. And so I'm going to highlight that in green. We can see a big curve moving upwards. Next, we have stage 3. There's no common name for this, but some textbooks refer to it as the industrial phase. And that's where birth rate falls due to access to contraception, increases in wages, urbanization, increase in status and education of women. And with that, the population growth begins to level off. And we see that beginning to level off, shown here towards the end of the stage 3. We see right here that it begins to level off. A stage 4, and often sometimes referred to as the developed countries phase. And then this is where birth rate and death rates are both low. And so if we want to take a look at that, we're going to highlight it in red. Again, birth rate is low on the y-axis. Death rate is also low as well, close to each other. So the population levels off, or if dramatic things happen, it starts to decrease. And again, this is due to people born during the stage 2 are now beginning to age and require the support of a dwindling working population. Again, birth rates drop below replacement level, considered to be 2 children per family, and this causes the population to level off or, in drastic cases, decrease. You need to be able to identify the differences between these population pyramids. So we have 4 different shapes here: rapid growth, slow growth, stable, and shrinking. The critical note about rapid growth is that it has a wide foundation. The second characteristic is that it has a curved slope, and it looks like a curved triangle. The next thing for slow growth is that we have the same foundation, big number of young people, and key characteristic is that it has a straight slope, and it forms just a triangle. Third is stable. Stable, we can draw a straight line on either side, and it should fit. So straight line. And last but not least, we have shrinking. Shrinking's characteristic is that it has a very, very small number of young people, so it can't replace the older people up here when they die. So shrinking has a small foundation. So I'm going to write that, small foundation. So let's take a look at examples to describe and apply these human population pyramids. We have, I'm going to erase some of this. So we have country X, country Y, and country Z. So obviously with country X, we see that it has a rapid growth, and I can trace my line to form a curved triangle. So country X, rapid growth, or the fastest growth rate. Then I look at country Y, and it looks like I can fit a straight line on either side, so that means it is stable. This one has the least growth. Okay, stable growth. Last but not least, I draw a line, and it looks like it's a triangle. So it has slow growth for country Z. So we were able to apply all 4 different shapes to these 3 graphs given to us from College Board. All you need to do is trace it, y'all, and you'll be able to determine which shape it is describing. There you have it. We'll come out with more ideas on what the exam will look like next week. Be sure to be on the lookout for a video over how the exam will work, how to submit the exam, take the exam, all the exam details later this week. Have a good one.